Right, I've seen a fair few people have joined, so we'll get started. Thank you everybody for joining us this evening for our CISI Young Professionals Network webinar on CVs, applications, interviews, how to nail the job application process. I'm Siobhan Baker. I sit on the YPN London committee and I'm going to be your chair for the session today. We are delighted to be joined this evening by Sally Gammage and Samantha Milligan. Nice to meet you both. Samantha is a senior consultant at Change Recruitment in the financial services team. She focuses on permanent and temporary recruitment opportunities in the risk compliance and internal audit space. She has 8 years recruitment experience working internationally and locally, supporting recruitment efforts within diverse industries. Sally is a senior consultant at Change Recruitment in the financial services team as well, focusing on junior to mid-level roles in investment operations. Sally has 8 years experience recruiting in the investment sector across the United Kingdom. Over the next hour or so, Sally and Sam will be taking us through their expert top tips and techniques for mastering CVs, job applications, and the interview process. Before I hand over to them though, for the first section of the session, we do have a couple of polls that we'd like to put to you to answer that are really going to help us tailor the session today for those in attendance. So you should shortly see a poll popping up on your screen. So the first question that we have, if you could select the option that best applies for you, is how long you've been working in financial services for. So you've been working in financial services for 0 to 2 years, 2 to 5 years, over 5 years, looking for the first permanent job in the sector, or you've recently made a career change into financial services and looking for a new position, or other. Just to let you know that all of the answers on these will be anonymous. Thank you everyone for answering that. Okay, that's quite a good spread that we've got there. It looks like the majority of people have been working in financial services for between 2 to 5 years or over 5 years, although there is quite a significant portion who've been working in financial services for 0 to 2 years. So that was really helpful. Thank you everyone. You should see the second poll popping up on your screen now. And this is about the reason that you're attending this webinar today. Is it because you want to perfect your CV writing skills? You mostly want to learn how to better prepare for future interviews? You mostly want to learn how to do better in the interviews themselves, or all of the above, or something else? Just give a few more moments to answer that. That was quite an easy one to see what everyone's here for. All of the above. Well, that's excellent because we're covering everything. So that's really helpful to know. Thank you everyone for answering those. Just before I hand over to Samantha, there's just a couple of housekeeping points. The first is we'll have the Q&A box open throughout the entire session. So if you have any questions, do just write them in to the Q&A as we go along, and I can put them to Sally and Samantha as we go through. And we've also got time for Q&As at the end as well. So don't worry if we don't ask them while we're going through it, there'll be time for that at the end. You can find the Q&A box just at the bottom menu bar. The second piece is if you have any technical issues, if you write those down in the chat function, that's also found on the menu bar, and then a member of the CISI team will be able to answer those queries directly for you. Okay, well, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Samantha, to talk CVs with us.
Wonderful. Thanks again, everybody, for joining. When writing your CV, it can be a challenging and daunting task that nobody really enjoys doing. So hopefully today we can tell you a little bit more about how to prepare for writing your CV and what to include on your CV as you're writing it. So when you're thinking about your CV, it's usually because you're looking for an internal movement or an external movement. So the first thing you want to do is identify your career roadmap. You know, why are you writing the CV? Did you see a job posting where you approached for an opportunity, or did you see something posted that caught your eye? So making sure that you're identifying where you want to take your CV next is definitely going to help you shape what you're writing. So each CV should be tailored to a particular job. The reason why I say that is because then you'll get the most out of your CV. You'll be able to utilize that space to the best that you can, really, by looking at the requirements section from that job description. To put those skills that you already have into writing on your CV will definitely make your CV that much more attractive. And so again, when looking at those requirements section, you'll be able to think about, what have you accomplished in the past? How are you a good candidate? Or I should say, what makes you a good candidate for this particular role? And looking at your value adds, what skill sets have you already gained that is going to benefit this next company or this next position? And know your dates. That's something that it may sound a little bit silly, but often gets forgotten when you're applying for new opportunities. You think to yourself, okay, when did I do that? And often when it comes down to references, those are things that can be cross-referenced. So just make sure that you know your dates for your previous roles and things like that. And then of course, identify the best CV format for you. So depending on the type of move that you're about to make will determine what CV format you want to use. So there's 3 CV formats. There is the chronological CV format, that's the sort of the traditional CV format that you often see. You know, if you go into Word and you just type in CV template, this is the type of CV that you'll often see. This format is for those individuals that are just showcasing what they've achieved over their career. It's sort of that basic format. You know, there's no gaps in your career. There's no need for explanation onto why you're applying for this new role. And it's just a very traditional format, which is definitely very beneficial for some individuals. The next one is the skills-based or functional CV. This is often used for people who want to focus on their skills and de-emphasize on their work history. So this could be a new graduate or somebody starting a second career, or somebody returning to the office after taking some time off, or even an internal move that just isn't the natural career progression within your realm. So it is a little bit of a non-traditional format, but it emphasizes your technical and transferable skills over your previous experience. And then there's also the combination. So this is the CV format that focuses on both your chronological working history as well as your skills. The only issue when it comes to your combination style format is that it can be a little bit lengthy, if I'm being honest with you. And you've got to really think of your CV as, you know, valuable real estate, and you want to try and get as much into it as possible, but also making sure that it is clear and concise. So the combination form can be a little bit lengthy. And so I typically suggest sticking to either the functional or the traditional based. So I've got some examples of each of these 3 for you. So the functionals first, again, like I said, it just focuses in on those key skills where your experience is down at the bottom. So this is something that, let's just say, a new graduate may very much benefit from. In the sense that while they're at school, they worked on a lot of projects or volunteer experience within the organization that will benefit them. However, their actual work experience is not as relevant. Again, the chronological CV format just shows your experience right there in the middle. It's sort of eye-catching. It's what people go to first. And then the combination, it's got a mixture of both, which again, like I said, can be a little bit lengthy. So once you've decided the type of format that you want to focus in on, now you've got to think about, okay, what do I include? Name, contact details, and professional designations. I know that sounds a little bit funny. Obviously, those are things that you're going to add in. But often, you know, I look at CVs and I think, where's the person's phone number on this? And so just make sure that those details are right at the top. They're clear and easy to identify. Your objective and professional statement, this is optional, completely up to you. It depends on yourself, really. And this would be a really good option if you're, again, like I said, changing your career path, or if you're looking for a promotion, whatever it may be. This just highlights in a few sentences your previous experience and why you're applying for this particular role. Your education, professional designations, and any certificates that you may have, make sure those are listed. And even if you're in progress with some of those, please list them. It's very important, especially if your professional designation is something that is often required on your next role. A lot of applicant tracking systems, people will just search out, okay, are they working on their CFA or are they working on their CIA, whatever it may be. And if you haven't identified that you're in progress with that, again, your CV will probably just be sifted over. And your technical skills, very important when it comes to any software or programs that you've used in the past. Again, like I said, those sort of applicant tracking systems will pick up on keywords and key phrases that are listed in that job description that you've got to make sure are listed on your CV, or it can get overlooked. You know, something as simple as listing Microsoft Office suite or Excel, even if it's just at an advanced or basic level, just having that keyword and that key phrase listed on your CV will definitely help make sure that you're getting the attraction it deserves. And then, of course, previous work experience as well. And just make sure you're tying all of these details back to that job description or that job posting that you've seen that you are applying for. And you want to make sure that you're showing them as quickly and easily as possible that you're the right candidate for this position. And additional tips is keep it short and sweet, but professional. So when you're writing your CV, you often want to throw in all of the key bits and all of the key details that you've done before, but try and keep it as short and sweet as possible. Just looking at the job description, looking at the responsibilities of that role, and explaining what you've done in your current role that match that. Focus on your accomplishments. So you achieved what in your current role or in your previous roles. That's so important. Like I said, refer to those requirement sections on the job description to identify those key skills. The applicant tracking system is a sneaky system, but it's definitely very beneficial for recruiters. I mean, often when you're applying for roles, you have to think that, you know, at least sometimes up to 250 people are applying for that same position. The numbers of applicants for any given job is quite high, especially at this time. And so often recruiters and internal HR have an applicant tracking system. And basically what they're doing is they're typing in these keywords and these key phrases that they need. And then those CVs that have those phrases and those keywords populate. The other ones unfortunately don't. So if it, you know, is something that you may think, oh, I have to have this skill set in order to be in the position that I'm in just now, it may seem very simple to you, but when it comes down to an applicant tracking system, they're really just focusing on those keywords and those key phrases. So just make sure that you're adding in those skills as much as possible. Like I said, tailor your CV for every single job that you're applying to. It's so important. And when you're doing that, make sure you're changing that professional statement. If you are choosing to write that professional statement, just making sure that if you're changing the job descriptions or if you're using the job title in that professional statement, that you're changing it. And I know that sounds so silly, but it's a common thing that people just slip up. You know, they get so excited to apply for a job that they forget that they had written a different job title in their professional statement as the last one. To keep on top of this, definitely update your CV regularly so you're not forgetting, okay, what did I do 5 years ago in my previous position or something like that. But at the end of the day, your CV is your story. We can tell you all kinds of things to add and remove and everything like that. But if you don't feel comfortable articulating your CV and articulating your experience in an interview, it's not going to get you very far. So just make sure that you're utilizing your own story and your own narrative when writing your CV, just so that it portrays a little bit smoother during interview processes. So after you've written your CV and you've applied for all of these lovely jobs, and of course you're successful because you've got a fantastic CV, the next step is for the phone screen. So the phone screen is initial contact with HR. They use this, or a recruiter, I should say, they use this to learn a little bit more about your skill set. So this is sort of a high-level conversation. It's a chance for you to gain insight into the organization, and it's a chance for the HR team or the recruiter to get to know you a little bit better. So understanding and building that initial relationship. And often this is sort of seen as a gatekeeper conversation. So it's the chance for you to ask as many questions as possible, get to know about the organization, get to know about the role, why the role is available, those sorts of key details, but also from the employer's perspective, they get to know whether you're initially the right fit. You know, do you have the skills that are required for this particular role? And sometimes these calls can be as quick as, you know, 5 minutes. Sometimes they can last longer, you know, about half an hour or so. But it just is a way for individuals to build that initial relationship between the candidate and the employer. Being prepared for one of these kind of phone screens is a little bit tricky. And, you know, they're going to ask you, why are you looking for a new position? What is your interest in the company and your compensation expectations? So being able to understand and prepare as much as possible for these phone calls is definitely beneficial. I know sometimes they sort of happen out of the blue where you'll apply for a job. Let's just say last night you had applied for a few positions, and then the next day you get all these phone calls from different companies. So just try as much as possible to position yourself to be prepared for these initial phone screens. And just, I suppose in terms of phone screen tips, most importantly is know your CV. The other thing is know the positions that you've applied for. It is far too common that, you know, people get frustrated on a Sunday and think, I don't want to go to my job tomorrow, I'm going to apply for all of these jobs. This is when I was talking about it's so important that you're tailoring your CV to each particular role that you're applying to. So know your CV, know the companies that you're applying to, and be prepared for these types of conversations. And the other thing I would say is keep it brief, keep it short and sweet, be professional as much as possible, and don't overcomplicate the conversation by any means. A lot of the times they may not have the answers to all of the questions that you're asking. If the questions are fairly technical, they'll probably just say, you know, hold that question until you're speaking with the hiring manager or further down in the process. But the type of questions that will be covered will be, you know, your motivating factors for leaving your current role, and why do you want to enjoy that, or why do you want to join this organization. They'll ask you about compensation expectations and your current compensation. They'll ask you about availability, and they'll probably ask you a little bit more about, you know, are you in the process with other companies, that sort of thing. So just knowing sort of your motivating factors beforehand, and knowing that the jobs that you're applying to, so that you're prepared and ready for these conversations. And like I said, just don't overcomplicate it, and you'll do absolutely fine.
That was really helpful and interesting, Samantha. Thank you. We've actually had quite a few questions for you in on the chat. So yeah, it's definitely got people thinking. We've got a question from Sagar, who asks, how much does the addition of extracurriculars and club activities impact the CV of an undergrad student? So that's, I think, referring to someone who doesn't have, you know, that experience in the financial services sector. And you mentioned when you were talking about the inclusion of things like projects and things like that of people who are coming out of school, kind of, you know, to what level should we be including those in our CVs?
Yeah, I think for those new graduates, it is quite important to include those programs and projects and whatever it may be. There's a number of candidates that I've spoken to in the past within financial services that were actually a part of the university fund team. So they were doing, you know, investment analytics, they were doing some financial analysis, they were doing various great projects and learning great skills. But they weren't putting it on their CV. They were putting, you know, just that they were, I shouldn't say just, but they were working in sort of part-time roles that weren't necessarily going to get their CV the attraction that it deserved. So making sure that that's where I think you should use those functional CVs, where it's talking about sort of the volunteer work or the academic work that you had done. If there was any research papers that you had done or anything like that, that is definitely beneficial as a new graduate coming into financial services, because that's definitely going to benefit you.
And talking about those different types of CVs, mainly the functional and chronological, I think you mentioned were the ones to sort of focus on. Is there sort of one that financial services firms tend to prefer one over the other, or is it really down to the individual and the individual's experience?
Yeah, a bit of both. So typically, I'll be completely honest with you, financial services typically like sort of that chronological layout, right? They like to they like to go through CVs and know this is where I find this information, this is where I find information. And the reason being is just because often HR and recruitment teams and hiring managers, when they're going through all of these applications, they sort of go on autopilot mode. And it's just the human body, right? They're searching for key things. They know in their minds what they need on their team. You know, there's a position available for a reason. So they're looking for somebody to help solve this problem. And in order to solve this problem, these are the skills that they need. And so oftentimes that sort of traditional chronological format is what they like to see. However, depending on the level of experience and depending on your background, there's no need for you to, the chronological format won't be beneficial to you. So if you're, for instance, let's just say a new graduate, that chronological format might not be the best for you. You know, if you've done a PhD in investment analytics or something of that nature, and that's what you want to highlight. You don't want to highlight the fact that you are working part-time somewhere else. So that functional CV would be better for them. So as much as I want to say chronological traditional format, there's definitely different situations that the functional format would work better for you.
That's really good insight into the minds of what the companies or types of companies that we're applying for are thinking. So that was really helpful. I think we could talk CVs all day. We've got lots of questions, but I'll save those for the Q&As at the end and pass over to Sally now to talk interviews.
So yeah, I'm going to be covering preparing for your interview. I would say preparing for your interview is absolutely critical. It might sound obvious, but it really truly is the difference between securing that role and not. It means that you feel more confident going into the interview. You just will sound more confident, more eloquent, and you'll get what you want out of it. I think before even sort of thinking about what you want to say in the interview, just remind yourself that interviews are 100% a sort of a two-way conversation. You know, they, as much as they are finding out if you're right for them, you are also finding out if they are right for you. So remember that, you know, consider that you, there'll be things that you want to get across, but there's also information that you're going to be wanting to get from them. And you get a very small amount of time to do it. So make sure you've really considered this prior to going into the interview and exactly what you want to find out from them. So that's the first thing I would say. So I think there's three kind of key things to consider. You want to absolutely do your research prior to the interview. You want to consider the type of format that the interview will be in and how to prepare for that particular format. Research is obviously really important. I think there's different layers to it. So kind of kicking off with researching the company. Of course, you know, it's very likely that they'll say, what do you know about us and why do you want to work for us in particular? So you really want to have a great answer for that, and a really kind of compelling answer, I guess. So yes, it's really important to go onto their website and find out how many employees they've got, you know, how many offices they've got, what's their global reach, where are the offices based, where's the head office, etc. So very much kind of factual information that you should definitely know prior to going into the interview, just to show that you've got, you know, you've done that research and you know about the company. But also, I think it's for me, I think what's really compelling is when someone's kind of really researched the business and found something about it that they really personally relate to, something that really resonates with you personally. I think that's when you can talk most passionately about why you want to work for this company in particular. So for example, you might look at the website and you might look at their values and find that you really align with their values, and that's something that you can talk about. You might also find that they're affiliated with a particular charity that you're very passionate about. I think those sorts of things that you can talk about from a personal point of view, you'll talk really passionately about, and that can be really compelling and quite convincing to them that this is a business that you want to work for. I think also I would say to make sure that you're really up to date on business activity and what they've been doing recently. I always recommend that candidates look at sort of articles on the company. I think that's the best way to really be up to date on what they've been doing most recently. So they might have done a big event that you've been quite impressed by, or gone through sort of a kind of merger. So it's really important that you know that really recent business activity. So I would really recommend looking at business sort of news articles for that kind of information. And of course, it's also really important that you know your interviewers. I find that just kind of going onto LinkedIn and even just seeing a picture of who your interview is going to be can often kind of make you feel familiar. It gives you a connection to that person before you even join the interview, and you kind of join and you think, oh, that's a familiar face, and it kind of can put you a little bit at ease. It's also really just important to know their background. It can really form the questions that you ask. So for example, if your interview has only been with the business for a couple of weeks, you're unlikely to ask them, how's the business developed over the last 10 years? You're probably more likely to ask them questions such as, I've noticed that you've only been with the business for a couple of months, how have you found the induction process, and what was it about the business that really attracted you and encouraged you to take the role. So that can be really, really insightful. So make sure you're asking that person relevant questions. It can also help you find, things that you might have in common with your interviewer and help you build rapport. So maybe you've worked for the same company as them previously, or you might have you might be sort of members of organizations that at the same time. So that can just help you build rapport, I guess, with your interviewer and help the interview run more smoothly. So absolutely, that sort of preparation is really, really, really important. I guess the next thing is to look at, consider the format of the interview. You can often find this out prior to the interview. If you're working with a recruiter, absolutely ask your recruiter and say, are you able to find out what format this interview will take? That's absolutely a fair question for you to ask, and it really helps you prepare for the interview. Equally, if you're not using a recruiter, absolutely it's perfectly reasonable to ask the company directly. It does just help you prepare. I find that I sort of help to place candidates into sort of their first, second, third roles, and I find that the most common interview format is the CV and competency or scenario-based interviews. So 9 times out of 10, this is the sort of interview format I find companies using. So I guess the most important thing for this is absolutely, so there'll always be a portion where they'll sort of want to talk through your CV and experience, and then ask you the competency and scenario-based questions. Of course, for the CV part of the interview, know your CV absolutely inside out. It's really crucial. They could pick out the most obscure thing on your CV and ask you to talk them through it. So it's so important that you just know everything. That's dates, what school what grades you got at school, absolutely everything. Be really kind of be able to talk them through it in a lot of detail. And that's really your opportunity to talk through your previous experience, any interests you have, so yeah, skills and experience essentially. I guess the competency and scenario-based part of the interview, this can really sort of throw some people, but I actually think it's an absolutely amazing opportunity for people to sort of demonstrate that they've done what this role is requiring previously, and so they can hit the ground running. Or if you haven't necessarily done it previously, then you can really, you've got the skills and knowledge to be able to attempt that, and give it a good go, basically. So I mean, competency-based questions can, examples are a real asset to you, where you can really say, this is when what I've done, what value it added, and really talk them through it in a lot of detail. So it's a really great opportunity for you to do that. I guess you'll also have conversational interviews. So I would find that typically kind of the CV and competency-based interviews would normally be a sort of first stage interview. Possibly second stage is more likely to be more conversational, sort of getting to know you, are you the right fit for the team, etc. And I think what I would say for this is it's likely to be more informal, but remain professional. Sometimes people can relax, feel just, I guess, be a bit complacent, but remain professional. Still try to show your skills and experience during that conversation, but equally you'll be really trying to build rapport during that conversational interview as well. I think as well, when you're in your early stages of your career and maybe your first interviews, often tests and assessment centres are quite common. So I just kind of wanted to raise those as well. I mean, testing, it's really all about timing. Often you can't necessarily prepare for those, but there are tests online, and really that just gets you into a testing mindset, I suppose. So I would really recommend kind of looking at those online tests. And assessment centres, I think they're less common now that we're kind of all a bit virtual, I guess. But I think often they can be done in group sessions, and it's all about listening, bouncing off other people in your group, and really kind of adding value when you're speaking. Really thinking about not just talking for the sake of it, just trying to add value when you do speak. So I'd say just absolutely key things for your interview is just know your CV inside out. Think about, really kind of nail down your achievements and scenarios that you've been in that you're really, really proud of, and try to weave them into either the conversation or into a scenario competency-based answer, but really have those achievements that you want to tell them about, and there will be an opportunity to tell them about those. So that's really key. And of course, questions can be quite underrated, but I think they're a really, really important part of the interview. The question part really demonstrates what your priorities are, what you want to find out, what's important to you. Those questions really show what's important to you. It shows preparation, and it shows a genuine interest in the company and the role and in the people that you're meeting. So really put time and effort into really preparing those questions. Also, a lot of candidates I have interviewing, they could be meeting 4 or 5 people, one after the other. Make sure that you have questions for absolutely everyone, because you don't want to be that last interviewer who and he says, oh, do you have any questions for me, and you say, oh no, I've asked all my questions. I think make sure everyone feels really valued and you're really genuinely interested in their experience and knowledge. So that's quite important. I guess I just wanted to touch on virtual interviews, because that's the new norm these days. So I did just want to touch on that. Not too much, but I guess things that you won't necessarily know until you're involved in that interview process. But every company is using different software these days, so just make sure you've got that software downloaded, ideally the day before. Test it the day before, test it the day of the interview, because Wi-Fi can do crazy things and change from day to day. So just just make sure you're on top of that. Set up your environment, make sure you've got a really tidy background. You're in a quiet place, you're not going to be disturbed, although you can't plan everything, but just try your best that you won't be disturbed. Business attire is crucial. It's really important that you can show you can be well presented. One day you will be back in the office, so they want to know that if they put you in front of senior members of staff, you will be well presented. So absolutely business attire. And even if your interviewers are in kind of t-shirts and shorts, don't worry about it, don't be phased. They will expect you to be in business attire. So I recommend log on 10 minutes before, just in case of last minute technical issues. And lastly, just relax and enjoy it. Honestly, it should be an enjoyable experience. If it's not, maybe it's not the right job for you, but do try to relax and enjoy it. It's important.
Thanks, Sally. That was really helpful, especially like the relax and enjoy it part at the end as well. That's, I think, a good piece of advice. We've had a couple of questions sort of along a similar line around the kind of scenarios that you were talking about and using examples. Do you have any tips for kind of how do you put those examples in there if you don't have the experience that's particularly relevant to that role, either because you're coming from more casual work like bar work, or something where maybe you're applying for a more senior role, so you have some experience but not necessarily exactly what is being asked for in this job? Do you have kind of any sort of tips on how to make your examples really good even if you don't have that experience?
Absolutely. I think firstly, just be completely honest. They can often see through if you're trying to pretend you've done something you haven't. They'll see through it. Just be completely honest, and they'll really appreciate that honesty, and you will always be able to find some experience that's relevant. So I had someone interview, a graduate interview a few weeks ago, and he drew on some experience from being a team leader at Starbucks. And I think and it was a really, just a Saturday job. You can get some fantastic experience from those roles. I think you can always say, I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't necessarily done that before. However, the most relevant experience I have comes from. That's really, truly the best you can do. But I really think, be honest, and you'll definitely be able to find, whether it's a part-time job, a club you've been in, even friendship situations, relationships, you can gain so much from anything in life. So definitely bring in those sorts of things. I don't know if that helps, but definitely draw on life experiences as much as work experience, because that's really, really valuable.
No, that's helpful. I think that's definitely something that I think as well. If you've not exactly done the job that you're looking for, it's good to know that you can pull other experiences. And I guess that links back to making sure that you add those things onto your CV as well. Like, are those things important to add onto your CV too, not just your kind of experience in the sector?
Definitely. And interestingly, the candidate who spoke about his experience at Starbucks, he hadn't put it on his CV, and the interviewer said, why is this not on your CV? I would have loved to have seen it on your CV. So absolutely, you might feel, I think sometimes, keep everything relevant and professional, but definitely draw on relevant experience. Yeah, sure.
That's really useful, thank you. I will save some of the other questions until the Q&As at the end, so I'll pass back to you, Sally, for more on the interview itself.
Yeah, so just to follow on, I mean, obviously the preparation is really important. Once you're in the interview, you just have to hope for the best. But there are things you can do just to stay really, I guess focused really in the interview. If you're prepared, you'll go into the interview feeling really confident. But I guess key tips for whilst you're in the interview is really listen to your interviewer. Often you can be you'll have so much going on in your mind from all your prep, and you'll be thinking, I must mention that, but don't forget to just really listen to the question they're asking you, and to give them a really good quality detailed answer. So I think listening is absolutely key. As much as you'll be talking a lot in the interview, absolutely, but listening is really, really important as well. Be yourself. They absolutely want to see you. So as much as it is a professional meeting, they'll want to see your personality come through, and they'll want to be able to kind of build that rapport. So just be yourself as much as you possibly can. No distractions. Just make sure there's nothing going on around you and you're kind of being distracted by anything. ask I've mentioned this before, but just make sure that you are asking questions to everybody. That's really key. And again, enjoy it, because as much as you can. Oh, I do have one slide. And then I guess following the interview, this is also really, really important. I think, to reflect on the interview. You might not, not necessarily get every job, but you can learn from, interviews, and use, if you reflect on that interview and think, oh, I could have actually done that better. You can use that. And I suppose following the follow-up is, you can definitely, sometimes it's appropriate to send a thank you email. I think it's if you've really built a rapport with that person. Sometimes it's not not always appropriate if you don't have that personal connection with the person who's interviewed you, but a thank you email can really go a long way. But also I think trying to get that feedback from the client after the interview is going to be really beneficial for you to move forward and improve in future interviews. So do follow up thank you email, and also just in case they're able to give you some feedback on maybe why you haven't been successful. And yeah, future development really ties into all of that. Interviews don't always go to plan, and that's okay. But you can definitely learn from them and improve, and you will get the right job for you down the line. So definitely learn from interview experiences.
So just to double click on I think you spoke about it quite a lot, about making sure you have those questions prepared to sort of ask your interviewers. Is there anything that's kind of off the table that maybe you shouldn't be asking about? Is it things like salary or flexible working? Is there anything you think that maybe you shouldn't be asking potential future employer in, say, a first interview, or is it just ask the questions that you want to know the answers to?
I'd be interested in what Sam thinks, but salary absolutely off the table in interviews for sure. I mean, definitely that's something to discuss with your recruiter or with the HR team, or the internal recruitment team. So I definitely wouldn't necessarily discuss things like salary or things like hours. I think that's the sort of information that you should, or benefits, that's the kind of information you should probably know prior to going into the interview. And the hiring manager will be kind of really more focused on you and what you can do day to day, and that they'll be wanting to discuss the role more than anything, and what you can bring to it. So that's my opinion. Sam, I'm not sure if you have anything else.
Yeah, definitely. No, I completely agree with you. Sticking to, I suppose, the questions that you should be asking are questions that you'll know or will benefit you in a day-to-day basis. What sort of challenges am I likely to face in this particular role? What does an average Wednesday look like? What does career progression in this particular role look like? What am I going to see or face, or what do you expect from me 3, 6, 9 months down the line? Those are the types of questions that you should be focusing on, and steering away from, well, how many vacation days do I get from this organization? And those are the types of questions you want to sort of maybe gear towards HR. But you will likely know all of those details before even going into the interview stage. So.
And what are your thoughts on taking something like notes into an interview with you? Is that something that's unacceptable, or sort of something you should have prepared beforehand, but then leave those sort of in the corner before you go into an interview?
My thoughts on this are that they can be very distracting. I think particularly whilst we're in a virtual world, it's even harder to keep engaged and to maintain that engagement. So I think if you're constantly sort of looking down, you're breaking that engagement, checking your notes, writing your notes, and I think they don't know what you're doing. You could be checking your phone, you could be doing anything. So I think it can really come across not so well if you're kind of taking notes or reading from notes. It just breaks that engagement and that flow. So that would be my thoughts.
Yeah, that makes plenty of sense. And I think you touched on it briefly when we talked about levels of experience and how you kind of get around those tricky questions. Do you have any sort of go-to tips or techniques if you get asked a really tricky question in an interview that maybe you're not expecting or you haven't prepared for? Do you have any kind of tips on how to sort of compose yourself and think about how you're going to answer before you start speaking?
I think just going off of what Sally had mentioned before, if you need a minute to think about it, that's fine. Just be honest. The one thing I would say is refrain from saying phrases like, that's actually a really good question, or something of that nature, because then they may think, well, were my other questions not that good? So that's the type of phrasing that I would suggest avoid. But it can be tricky because it's going to stump you, right? And so just taking a minute and thinking, let me have a think about this, because I wasn't prepared for a question like this, or something along the lines. I mean, it's human to human contact. So I suppose as long as you're genuine about it, and as long as you're soft natured about your response to, let me have a moment to think of my response, it should be absolutely fine.
Yeah, that's some good advice. Just be honest and authentic is what I'm sort of taking away from this as well. And then I have a question as well on the, you mentioned the follow-up, Sally, after the interview. And I know, and this links back to the parts you were talking about on CVs, Samantha. I know when I have, you present your CV, is there any way to get feedback on a CV if you don't get a job off the back of, you don't even get invited to the interview? Is there any way to get feedback from that, or is it just something we have to accept that maybe you'll never know why your CV wasn't chosen in that particular instance?
I guess in my experience, it's less likely that you're going to be able to get a feedback on CVs. I think it will depend on the company that you've applied to. Some companies will be receiving hundreds of CVs, so it's really tough, understandably, as much as they would love to, for them to provide feedback on why your CV wasn't selected. And then you weren't taken forward for an interview. So if you're applying for a company where maybe not many people have applied, absolutely get in touch and give it a, ask. There's no harm in asking, but if there's likely to be hundreds of CVs sent, less likely to get feedback. I would say more, if you have been for an interview, I think that's definitely when you can follow up and ask for feedback on why you've not been taken forward in the interview process. But on the CV, unlikely, unfortunately, in my experience. So yeah.
So lots of the questions that we've had in are relating to the CV. So we'll sort of jump back to talking about that CV piece. And somebody asked a really good question, actually. Clarissa asks, so she says that she struggles to get noticed because she doesn't have a degree, even though she has qualifications that are directly related to the role. Is there something sort of different in how you need to present yourself in a CV for people who have university degrees versus those who don't? Do you see that there needs to be something different that's done in those instances?
That is a very, very tricky and specific question. And in my opinion, your experience should definitely still allow you to get the attraction that you deserve for these particular roles. What I maybe would suggest is, depending on where you have your education referenced on your CV, if you bring it down to one of the bottom bits, just so that it's highlighting your core experience. So right when they see sort of your name, and beside your name have your professional qualifications, if you decide to write a professional blurb or objective, and then right there, it's talking about your most recent experience, and it's talking about your key skills. Unfortunately, I don't know a specific answer to give you, but I would maybe suggest bringing your your education a little bit below your experience, just so that they're looking at those sort of, I suppose, your achievements versus your education.
And I suppose that comes back to the different types of CV that you talked about, doesn't it? And tailoring it for you.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of example could be used in both the traditional format and functional format. Typically with a traditional format, it will be your education and then experience. But if you want to put your experience first, then education below, that's absolutely fine. It still sticks within that traditional format that major organizations do like to see. It just takes the pressure off your educational aspect and more pressure on, this is what I've already accomplished and achieved in my career.
Mm-hmm. And if you're sort of looking for help and maybe CV checking or help with your CV, is that something that when you use a recruitment agency that they can help you with, or are there kind of other ways that you can get people to review your CVs? And I think a lot of the questions are maybe just kind of not clear if our CVs are good or not good, because we probably haven't been in positions where we've seen lots of them. And is that something that a recruitment agency can help you with if you use one?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I know Sam will agree with me, absolutely. Work with your recruitment agency if you're using one on your CV at 100%. That's what we're here for. So, and we love it. It's music to our ears when someone comes and says, "Oh, what do you think of my CV? Are there any changes?" Sometimes there are no changes, and that's brilliant. And but often there are, and there are lots of ways that you can improve your CV. So I would say, work, because also we work with CVs day in, day out, but it's understandable if you've got your CV and it's really only you've only used it a few times, you might not know what's best, and as as your career progresses, maybe how you structure that CV will change. So definitely work with your recruitment consultant and just say, "Oh, have you got any advice on my CV?" And we'll definitely help with that. There's lots of things you can do to make it stand out more. So use us.
Helpful to know. There was a question that we had about cover letters and the importance of cover letters. Is that something that's kind of important, or do you see that sort of professional blurb and CV is the more important part of that sort of documentation phase almost of the application process?
Yeah, I mean, I might get slapped on the hand for saying this, but I am of the mindset that cover letters are going a little bit out of style. However, depending on the organization that you're applying to, it is required. So I did skip over the cover letter part. Often I would much prefer, and I would recommend candidates who are applying for a job specifically, as much as possible, to find the email address of the person responsible for that role, and using the blurb of the email as your cover letter. So this is where you have a few sentences to very briefly introduce yourself and explain why you're interested in this role, and ask for some sort of conversation or initial discussion about the position in a little bit more detail. And again, I understand that a lot of organizations, when you're applying directly, do require you to have a cover letter, but I'm of the mindset that your CV should be enough to get you through to that initial phone screen at least, and then from there it's up to you to get yourself to that interview stage. But I definitely think if you're putting enough information into your CV, that should be enough to get you that initial phone screen. Sally, you may think differently. So
no, I completely agree. I think the CV gives you enough scope to be able to say, interview me for sure. I think I think sometimes a cover letter is great to just give a bit more I guess more detail on your goals and your what I suppose why you're applying for that job in particular, but my honest opinion is a CV should be sufficient to get you an interview, so 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. We've had a few questions as well about the automatic tracking system, and I think you mentioned, Samantha, the key word pieces, and I think people are kind of interested to know a little bit more about how that works. Is it off the job descriptions that kind of the keywords you need to use, and at what point does it become an inauthentic use of these words where it's just a little bit too much on the CV?
Yeah, I mean, applicant tracking systems are a blessing and a curse to everybody. It definitely helps with automation, and it helps for recruiters and hiring managers to see sort of the top CVs. But just because you have listed that you can do SQL 7 times throughout your CV doesn't actually mean that you're the best qualified candidate for that particular role. So applicant tracking systems, as you're applying through roles, you'll often see that you are taken from the company website into another hosting website. So whether it's Workday, Fieldglass, whatever it is, and those systems are what HR and hiring managers use to look at the applications, to look at your CVs. And oftentimes the applicant tracking system will match sort of your CV based on your keywords and based on your sentences to the job description, and they'll sort of chronologically order who they feel, the system feels, is the most relevant for that particular position. So it can be a blessing and it can be a curse, because not often people will use the same terminology and the same phrases for all of their workload as the same as the job description. So like I said, it can be a blessing and a curse, but it is definitely beneficial to make sure that when you're going through those job descriptions and when you're looking at those job ads online, if it says required, that those skills that you have are on your CV. And if it does say, you know, let's just say asset management experience is a strong asset. You know, if you've got asset management experience, add that somewhere in your CV. Those sorts of phrases will definitely help you with these applicant tracking systems that people are using.
That makes sense. And I think I think you touched on this, but there was a question, so I think it's worth probably double clicking on the importance of then tailoring your professional statement and your CV for every single role that you apply for. Is that sort of your big bit of advice, is that you really need to make sure that what you're doing is very specific to the role?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, often people will write in their professional statement, you know, experience, let's just say experience internal auditor with 5 years financial services experience, interested in moving into a senior internal auditor manager role, or whatever it may be. And they're using the title of the current or the job that they're applying to in that professional statement, and then continuing to use that CV to apply for other ones without changing that title or changing their objective there, right? So making sure that you're tailoring your objective to that organization, like Sally had mentioned, you know, do you have shared values and beliefs with that organization? Does that organization align with your career aspirations and your career goals? And then also just making sure that, you know, that objective in that professional statement is in line with that particular job as well.
Yeah, that's great. And then just conscious of the time, I think we have time for one more question, which is to some of the points that you were talking to, Sally, about, you know, in the preparation for the interview, researching the company well. And you mentioned kind of going on their website and looking at articles. Are there any sort of, where are the top places that you can go to find out information about a company?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think their website, if there's not much on their website, I mean, LinkedIn, you can get a lot from LinkedIn. They often, on their LinkedIn page, they'll have a blurb on their on their company. You can look at the people, all the people who work for them. You can click on people and it just brings all the people, all the employees up. But I also genuinely, you know, Google and see what comes up, and often news articles come up, and it's that, you know, you can find stuff on there that is really fascinating and stuff that you wouldn't normally know they might not put up on their website. So I honestly, they're the kind of key three go-to. I would say LinkedIn, news articles, and the website. Sam, I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything, but they're, to be honest, I think you'd get most things from those three areas.
Great, thank you. That was very helpful, and thank you both of you so much for this. It was really insightful, and I know I found it helpful. And judging by the amount of questions that we had and the way you answered them, I'm hoping that everybody else found them helpful as well. So thank you very much for your time. And thank you everyone for attending on this sunny evening in London and in the UK, I think. So we're going to wrap it up here. Just before we go, I've got a couple of reminders for people. The first being that your CPD from this event will be uploaded automatically after the session and within 2 working days. The session's being recorded for the CISI TV, so that will be available for re-watching, and the slides will also be made available. We had a question about whether those different types of CVs would be made available, and the slides will be afterwards, so you can see them on there. Then a little bit of a plug for our next YPN event, which is a webinar to celebrate Pride Month, and it's going to be on the 29th of June. And it's on the importance of pride, role models and allies with Matt Cameron, who's the Global Managing Director at LGBT Great. So if you'd like to book into that, I think it's going to be a really great session. You can do that on the CISI website. And finally, just a reminder to look out for the fortnightly emails from the CISI listing our upcoming live webinars and new CISI TV content, or visit the website to be able to see the full listings. So thank you very much again to Sally and Samantha, and thanks for everyone for attending. Hope you have lovely evenings and rest of your day.
Thanks, Ron.
Bye.